Blood shone on the brass knocker at midnight. "Don't open it," Dante Salvator said behind her, voice low and lethal. "If you do, little saint, you don't get to belong to the life you had before." I was Adriana Salvator, the wife people watched in churches and charity rooms and never understood. Married to a man who ruled the city with silence, slept behind a locked door, and had never once touched me like a husband. In 2 minutes, his former mistress would collapse across my threshold. In 2 hours, I would be holding a feverish little girl with Dante's eyes, while armed men filled the halls, and nobody said the word betrayal out loud. The woman at the door came bleeding through silk and rain, one arm wrapped around a child, the other around a secret big enough to split a marriage open. And the secret I hid was worse than hers. I had never married Dante for love. I had married him to save 23 children from losing their home. By dawn, that lie would either save all of us, or destroy the only man I was already afraid to need. Chapter 1. The knock. She didn't ask whose child. The first thing I heard was the click. Dante's silver lighter snapped open somewhere below my room, precise and metallic, followed by the soft drag of flame. That sound had a way of moving through the Salvator house faster than footsteps. Men changed posture when they heard it. Voices thinned. Doors seemed to remember what they were made for. I had learned that in 9 months of marriage. The mansion was built out of old stone and silence. At midnight, the marble held cold like memory. I was barefoot, standing beside the narrow window in my room, when thunder rolled over the city and the knock came from downstairs. 3 hard strikes, not polite, not hesitant. Desperate enough to sound rude, I reached for the robe thrown over the chair. A moment later, my bedroom door opened without a knock of its own. Rosa Bellini stood there in a dark dress and slippers, gray hair pinned back, face pale in a way I had only seen once before, on the day I signed my marriage license. "Madonna," she whispered. "Stay here. What happened?" "Nothing good." She turned, but I was already moving past her. I should tell you I had become brave by then. I had not. I was simply tired of being the last person told things in my own life. The downstairs hall glowed gold under chandeliers. Men were gathering at the front entry, with guns under jackets and stillness in their shoulders. Dante stood at the center of it, all in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled once, his lighter open in one hand, flame touching the end of a cigarette. He did not seem interested in smoking. He looked over when he saw me on the stairs. There was no surprise in his face. Dante Salvator rarely insulted himself with visible surprise. "Go back upstairs," he said. "Someone's knocking." His gaze held mine for 1 beat too long. "That's why." Then the knocking came again, weaker this time. The men closest to the door glanced at Dante, waiting. He did not nod. He did not lift a hand. He only watched the wood as though it had already offended him. I don't know why I moved. Maybe because nobody else did. Maybe because my entire marriage had taught me that if Dante stayed still long enough, the room would choose fear over action every time. I crossed the hall. One guard muttered my name under his breath. Another took a step forward to stop me, then stopped himself because Dante had not spoken. His voice came low behind me. "Don't open it, little saint." It was the first time he had ever called me that, not tenderly, not warmly, like he was naming a flaw. I put my hand on the brass handle anyway. Rain hit the threshold the moment I pulled the door open. A woman stumbled into the light wearing a cream silk dress soaked dark at the waist with blood. Mascara had run into her cheeks. Her lipstick was gone on one side of her mouth. She would have fallen if the child in her arms had not made her hold herself upright 1 second longer. I knew her face. Everybody in Dante's world knew Sofia Vittori's face. Nightclub singer. 2 summers ago, the woman the papers called his favorite mistake. My stomach turned cold so quickly it felt clean. "Please," she said, looking not at Dante but at me. "Take her." The child was curled into her shoulder in a red coat too thin for the weather, small fingers locked around a painted wooden music box. She had dark lashes, rain on her brow, and eyes so much like Dante's that denial would have been a childish religion. Nobody breathed, Sophia swayed. "He found us!" Dante crossed the hall then, fast. The kind of fast that did not look rushed until you realized he had already arrived. "Who?" he said. She laughed once and there was blood in it. "Still you, even now." I should have looked at him. I should have asked the question any normal wife would ask first. "Is she yours?" Instead, I looked at the child. Her lower lip was blue. Her knuckles were split where she had held the music box too tightly. She had the blank, hard stare children get when fear has gone past crying and found something quieter. I reached for her. Sophia held on for half a second longer, as if her body had forgotten how to release the only thing that mattered. Then she let go, and the girl came into my arms cold as rainwater. "It's all right," I whispered, though it clearly was not. "I've got you." The child's fingers caught in the front of my robe. She did not speak. Sophia watched that happen and shut her eyes once, like pain had finally found somewhere to sit. Dante's voice lowered another degree. That was when people should have run. "Who found you?" Her gaze shifted to him, then beyond him, as if she could already see death coming down our hall in expensive shoes. "Raphael." Everything in the room changed. It was slight if you did not know these men. Shoulders tightened. One guard touched the inside of his jacket. Rosa made the sign of the cross without seeming to. Dante did not move at all. Sophia laughed again, softer. "I told him I'd keep quiet. I did, for 5 years, Dante." Her eyes slid to me. "I wasn't here to ruin her." I did look at him then. His face gave me nothing. That was its own violence. "Is this child mine?" he asked. The little girl flinched at his voice, not because it was loud, because it was final. Sophia nodded once. "Lucia." Dante stared at the child in my arms. I watched something pass through his eyes so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. Not denial, not joy, something worse. Recognition without permission. Sophia took one breath, then another. The third never finished. She folded at the knees. Tommaso caught her before her skull hit the marble, but the sound that came out of Rosa was already the sound reserved for things that could not be repaired. The girl in my arms made no noise at all. She only buried her face in my throat. I held her harder. "Call Dr. Vanni," Tommaso snapped. Dante crouched beside Sophia and put 2 fingers to her neck. I watched his hand. Steady, clean. Beautiful in the terrible way some weapons are beautiful. After a moment he stood. "No doctor," he said. Rain kept falling through the open door until a guard shut it. The heavy bolt dropped into place with a sound I felt in my ribs. Lucia lifted her face just enough to look at Dante. He looked back. Neither of them spoke. Then his gaze came to me. To the child in my arms. To my hand over the back of her head, shielding it from a room full of armed men and ugly truths. Something in his expression altered. Not softened. Shifted. "Take her upstairs," he said. "She's freezing." "I know." I should have said something sharp, accusing, human. Instead, I nodded like a woman in shock and turned toward the stairs. "Adriana." I looked back. His lighter snapped shut in his hand. "For tonight," Dante said, eyes on Lucia and not on me. "She stays with you." Nothing in that house belonged to the woman I had been before midnight. Chapter 2. Separate bedrooms. He gave the order without raising his voice. Lucia woke screaming without sound. That was the worst part. At 4 in the morning, I came upright in bed because small fingers were clawing at the front of my nightgown, and a child's mouth was open against the dark with no voice coming out of it. Her eyes were wide, not with confusion but with recognition. She knew exactly where she was not. "Lucia," I touched her shoulder gently. "You're safe." Safe was an ugly word in that house. It fit nowhere cleanly. I lit the bedside lamp. She flinched at the sudden gold, then buried her face in my stomach. The music box she had brought with her was wedged under her arm like a relic. "It's all right," I said again, because adults often repeat the lie they most want to be true. Her coat lay draped over a chair where Rosa had left it after warming milk and finding a child-sized nightdress in the impossible storage system of rich houses. My room smelled faintly of lavender soap, rain, and the metallic trace of blood that had dried on Lucia's sleeve before I managed to wash her hands. I stroked her hair until the rigid shaking eased. When the dawn came, it came gray. Rosa brought breakfast on a tray for two and looked at me with the kind of pity I had always hated in older women. "Eat," she said. "I'm not hungry." That has never once stopped grief. She set down coffee, toast, eggs I wouldn't touch, and a tiny bowl of sliced pears that Lucia stared at as if they had personally betrayed her. Rosa's eyes softened on the child. "Buongiorno, Piccola." Lucia said nothing. Rosa looked at me again. "He's downstairs." That could have meant anything. Dante was almost always somewhere below the level of ordinary people, making decisions that moved money, bodies, and fear through the city. But this morning, I knew what she meant. He was waiting. I dressed carefully in a dark blue dress with a high collar. Dressing had become armor sometime around month 3 of marriage. If I looked composed enough, sometimes I could believe I still owned myself. Lucia refused to let go of my hand, so I took her downstairs with me. The breakfast room had windows over the east garden and enough polished wood to reflect every mistake a woman could make. Dante stood at the far end beside the fireplace, jacket on, tie loosened, talking quietly with Tommaso. The head of security was broad, scarred, and carried stillness the way priests carried incense. When we entered, Tommaso stopped talking. Dante turned. He looked as if he had not slept. On him, exhaustion sharpened instead of softening. His gaze went first to Lucia, then to our joined hands, and finally to me. "Sit," he said. "Good morning to you too." His mouth shifted by less than a smile. "Good morning, Adriana." It might have sounded civil to anyone else. To me, it sounded like a man choosing not to make things worse yet. Lucia stood half behind my skirt. I pulled out a chair for her and sat beside her rather than across from Dante. Petty, perhaps, but pettiness was one of the few luxuries still available to wives. He dismissed Tommaso with a glance. The man left, shutting the door softly behind him. For a moment the only sound was silver against china from Rosa setting down another cup. Dante stayed standing. "The child will remain here." I stared at him. "You say that as if somebody asked. You may as well know the rest. A blood test is being arranged." "Necessary? Yes. Cruel." He absorbed that without visible offense. "Necessary." Lucia's hand tightened under the table. I realized she understood more than I had assumed. Children always did. They simply lacked the power to stop adults from using that against them. "What happens if the test says what your eyes already do?" I asked. He was quiet long enough that I looked up. "It changes the security profile of this house," he said. "Not it changes my life. Not I have a daughter, not 5 years. Security profile." A laugh almost escaped me. It died before it fully formed. "You really are extraordinary. Do not mistake restraint for a lack of understanding." My pulse kicked once hard. I hated when he did that. Said one direct thing and made me feel all the unsaid ones around it. Lucia pushed the pears away. I lifted one slice and ate it myself. After a second, she took another and bit into it, eyes still on Dante. His expression changed again when he saw that. That child would eat if I ate first. Trust by imitation, not his world, mine. A knock came at the side door, followed by a voice I knew too well. "If nobody is being shot in here, may I come in before my blood sugar falls and I become unusable to organized crime?" Dante closed his eyes for half a second. "Enter Gianni." Gianni Perry swept into the room carrying a leather folio and the expression of a man personally offended by mornings. He was slim, elegant, too handsome to be comic and somehow comic anyway, with dark curls, expensive glasses, and the spiritual suffering of someone who had spent years pretending he enjoyed almond flour. He saw Lucia, and stopped mid-stride. "Ah," he said softly, "so the apocalypse had a braid." Lucia blinked at him. He put a hand over his heart. "Forgive me, that was insensitive. I was told there was a child. I was not told there was a child with eyes. Rosa, if you baked for the morning crisis, I'll need strength." "You need self-control," Rosa called from the hallway. Gianni sighed toward heaven. "And there she is, The woman who will never love me until my funeral. Against all reason, Lucia made the smallest sound. Not a laugh exactly, but the beginning of one. Gianni heard it and lit up. Excellent, I live for difficult audiences. Dante's gaze flickered to Lucia, then to Gianni. You have 3 minutes. Gianni opened his folio. Right. Less romance, more catastrophe. Sofia Vittori rented a flat under a false name for 16 months, paid in cash. 3 weeks ago, those payments stopped. Last night, one of Raphael Mancini's warehouse runners disappeared from the River District. Also, 2 of our outside cameras at the West Gate glitched for 8 seconds. Tommaso, I thought immediately, then felt ashamed. Suspicion came too quickly in these houses. Dante said only 8. Apparently even betrayal is doing budget cuts. Gianni, right. He cleared his throat. There's more. Sofia contacted St. Agnes 3 months ago. The air left my body so abruptly I felt it in my teeth. Dante's head turned toward me. I kept my face still, barely. How do you know that? I asked. Gianni adjusted his glasses. Because nothing involving church donations, forged names, or women who turn up bleeding at midnight remains private in this city for long. What did she want with St. Agnes, that, Gianni said carefully, is what we're finding out. Dante was looking at me now in that terrible, unblinking way of his. He knew St. Agnes was my place. The children's home I had saved by marrying him, the wound under my wedding band. I lifted my coffee. My hand did not shake. Lucia slid off her chair without warning and walked straight to Dante. My breath caught. The whole room changed again, smaller this time, more intimate and somehow more dangerous. She stopped an arm's length away, looked up at him, and held out the music box. It was painted wood, chipped at the corner with a tiny gold leaf halo around a carved angel on the lid. He stared at it as if it were evidence. Then, very slowly, he took it. The child watched his face like she was waiting to see whether the world would reject her twice in the same night. Dante turned the crank once. A few broken notes came out. Thin, damaged. Almost a lullaby. Lucia reached for it again. He gave it back immediately. Then his hand hovered, as though he meant to touch her hair and remembered too late he had no right to know how. He stepped away first. Always him, always first. He looked at me over Lucia's bowed head. You will not leave the house today. Am I your wife or your hostage? For today, his voice was quiet enough to be mistaken for kindness. The difference is not useful. That was how he did control. No raised voice, no spectacle, just a sentence that shut every window in the room. I understood then that my old life was not gone in one dramatic break. It was being closed, one soft lock at a time. Chapter 3, Gold Leaf and Gunmetal. The child drew the man he feared. Lucia did not speak on the first day. She spoke with her shoulders, with the way she stiffened at male footsteps, with the precise care she took not to let her music box out of reach. She spoke with hunger delayed until someone else ate first, with sleep that came in fragments, with the terrible politeness of frightened children. By the second day, I had turned the small morning room off the library into a workspace. Rosa found me old newspapers and a box of pencils from some forgotten school drive. I sent for charcoal, soft brushes, rabbitskin glue, and the small restoration case I had not opened since my wedding. The room smelled like dust, paper, and the faint sweetness of varnish. It felt more like mine than any bedroom in the house ever had. Lucia sat at the table, feet not touching the floor, watching me lay out tools as if I were performing a religion. You can use the black ones first, I told her. They're forgiving. She did not answer, but her fingers went to the charcoal. The music box sat beside us. In daylight, its damage was clearer. Cracked corner, flaked paint, a seam lifting along the underside where moisture had gotten in. It wasn't expensive. It was loved. Those were not the same thing. I touched the chipped gold leaf halo on the lid. Did your mother give you this? Lucia's face changed at the word mother. Not pain exactly. A ceiling. I nodded once. All right. We won't talk. Her first drawing was a house, not this house. A a narrow building with a fire escape and a window painted red. Her second was a woman with yellow hair and blood at her waist. Sophia, without question. Her third was only a man's hand, large, square knuckles, dark sleeve, one ring, a wolf's head in silver. I went very still. I had seen that ring before, not on Dante. On Raphael Mancini, his cousin, who wore charm and menace like layered cologne. He had kissed my cheek at our wedding and told me I looked too honest for the family, which at the time I had mistaken for wit. Lucia dragged more charcoal over the page until the wolf ring nearly tore through. "Lucia," I said softly. "Who is that?" She kept shading. A knock sounded once against the open door. I looked up. Dante leaned against the frame in shirt sleeves, no jacket, tie gone, his lighter turning over once in his fingers before disappearing back into his palm. He took in the room in one sweep. The tools. The drawings, Lucia beside me, and then his gaze fixed on the page. I watched him see the ring. He did not react visibly. I felt the reaction anyway. "I was told you hadn't worked in months," he said. "Who told you that?" "Your hands did." I looked down. Varnish dust had settled across my fingers. There was charcoal on the side of my wrist. For one sharp second, I remembered who I had been before marriage had turned me into a carefully dressed ghost. "She needed something to do," I said. "Did she? She's a child, Dante. I'm aware." "Are you?" Lucia's shoulders tensed at my tone. I regretted it at once. Dante stepped into the room. He seemed too large for it immediately. Power had a way of making ordinary spaces confess their limits. He stopped across from Lucia, not close enough to corner her. I noticed that. Against my will, I noticed many things about him. His voice dropped. "Who showed you that hand?" Lucia did not answer. Her eyes stayed on the page. "Enough," I said quietly. "She doesn't owe you speed." His head turned toward me. That should have been the moment I backed down. Instead, I lifted the damaged music box and set it between us. "This seam opened because somebody forced it," I said. "Not recently, a while ago." The wood swelled and dried again. I held up the underside where the paint had bubbled. "There may be something hidden inside." His eyes narrowed. "You can tell that by looking at it?" "Yes." A beat. Then Dante pulled out the chair opposite Lucia and sat. I almost forgot how to breathe. He did not sit with us. Men like Dante did not sit with wives and children over broken objects. They stood over meetings, over bodies, over maps. Sitting meant participation. Sitting meant some small surrender of distance. Lucia looked up at him, startled. His forearms rested on his thighs. "Show me." So I did. I explained the split in the grain, the lifting gesso, the poor repair someone had once attempted with household glue. Lucia watched my hands instead of his. The room went quiet in the good way silence sometimes can. When I reached for my smallest blade, Dante's hand closed over my wrist. Not hard. Still, every nerve in me seemed to learn its name at once. "You use that on wood," he said. "Yes." His thumb rested exactly where my pulse betrayed me. Then he let go, restraint, always restraint. It should have felt merciful. Mostly it felt cruel. "I'll restore it tonight," I said, because my voice had to do something. Lucia slid the drawing across the table toward Dante. The wolf ring stared up from black charcoal. He took the page. "This stays here," he said. "With me," I corrected. "With you," he allowed. Lucia looked from him to me, deciding something in that distance. She rose from her chair and came around the table, not to him, but to my side. Her small hand found the fabric at my waist and held there. Dante watched it happen. I shouldn't tell you I understood him then. I did not. But I understood that he was not a man accustomed to arriving second in any room, and something about that child choosing me first had landed in a place he kept armored. That afternoon, he took me to the south wing, not by asking. Tommaso met us outside the double doors, nodded once to me, and opened them onto the nerve center of the Salvetor Empire. Men around a long table, city maps pinned with colored markers, phones, ledgers, the stale, charged smell of espresso and gun oil. Conversations stopped when I entered. That was new. Usually they stopped for him. She stays, Dante said. No explanation. None offered. Raphael Mancini stood near the far window in a charcoal suit, wolf head ring bright at his hand. He smiled when he saw me, easy and warm and completely false once you had seen a child grind charcoal into paper. Adriana, he said, our house is finally civilized. I forced myself to smile back. Is it? His gaze flicked to the folder in Dante's hand. He saw the drawing edge, not enough to know, enough to wonder. Something cold moved down my spine. Later, much later, I would remember the way Dante looked at his cousin then. Not with trust, not even with anger, with measurement. At the time, I only knew I wanted to get back to the room with glue and wood and a little girl who slept badly. When we reached the hall again, Dante spoke without looking at me. You will not mention the ring to anyone. You already think it means something. I think children remember what terrifies them. And adults. He stopped walking. The lighter appeared in his hand again, thumb brushing the engraved saint without opening it this time. Adults, he said, lie better. For a second, he simply watched me. Then, in the briefest break of discipline, his gaze dropped to the charcoal on my wrist where his thumb had been. When he walked away, he left the air changed behind him. I stood there with my heart behaving like a foolish thing, and realized someone had already started moving against us. Chapter 4, The Chapel's Smoke. His hand stayed too long. Sophia was buried on Thursday. Not with honor, not without it either. In Mafia families, funerals obeyed strange mathematics. Sin could be forgiven if it had been useful long enough. Betrayal could be excused if it had produced leverage. Love, however, was almost always buried as a liability. The Salvetter private chapel sat on the edge of the estate, stone and stained glass and old family guilt. Lucia wore a black coat Rosa altered overnight. I pinned her braid myself because my hands needed a task. Dante stood at the front beside the coffin, expression shut cleanly into place. Raphael stood one row behind him in black gloves, head bowed like Chapter 5. The music box, Sophia left proof inside the thing her daughter loved most, by the time the funeral ended. The chapel smelled of wax, incense, and wet wool. Lucia had stood through all of it with one hand locked in mine, and the other wrapped around the hem of her black coat. Dante stood at the front beside Sophia's, coffin-like judgment in a dark suit, unreadable and impossible to move. Raphael kept his head bowed in the second row, black gloves folded neatly, grief performed with the polish of a man who had practiced sincerity in mirrors. I hated him by then for the ring alone. When the last prayer finished, people began to shift toward the door in soft, expensive rustles. The priest murmured something to Dante I did not catch. Rosa guided Lucia to the side aisle for air. I stayed back a moment longer in the pew, less out of devotion than because my body had become tired of pretending it belonged in rooms like this. Your wife looks pale, Raphael said from beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. I turned. Then perhaps you should stop startling her in chapels. His smile deepened. Adriana. I only meant you've had a difficult week. You say that like you're sorry. He leaned one shoulder against the end of the pew, wolf head ring flashing once in stained light. In this family, sorrow is usually just delayed information. I held his gaze and smiled back. Then let me give you some. I dislike you more each day. His brows lifted, amused rather than wounded. Good, distrust is healthier than charm. Before I could answer, Dante appeared at the aisle. He did not ask what passed between us. He only looked at Raphael once, and whatever he saw there made the air tighten. Then he turned to me. We're leaving. Not come with me, not are you ready. Just the sentence itself, and the world altered around it. At the house, Lucia fell asleep on the settee in the small morning room with her shoes still on, one fist around the music box. Rosa draped a blanket over her. Gianni appeared in the doorway carrying ledgers under one arm and an expression of injury. I would like it noted, he said, that I have now attended 2 funerals this month and neither offered proper pastry. Rosa, passing with a tray, said, Your suffering is theatrical. My suffering, Gianni said, laying a hand over his heart, is underfed. Lucia didn't wake, but her mouth softened in sleep for the first time since she arrived. Gianni saw it and lowered his voice at once, comedy bending into kindness so quickly it almost hurt to watch. I found the parish donation records, he told me. And a list of properties held by Vittori shell companies. Dante wants both. I'll bring them. He hesitated. Adriana, yes, there are easier men than him. I looked toward the child on the settee, then toward the hall where Dante's footsteps had already disappeared. That was never the point. Gianni studied me a moment, as if he knew exactly how dangerous that answer was. Then he nodded and left Rosa to pretend she wasn't watching him go. I waited until Lucia was sleeping deeply before I took the music box to the work table. The crack along the underside was worse than I'd thought. Cheap glue had been pressed into the seam years ago, badly enough that it had sealed dirt into the join. I set out my smallest tools, lamp angled low, and began teasing the edge apart. Dante came in when I had the blade halfway under the lifted panel. He stood behind me long enough that I felt him before I looked. Not touch, not sound. Just the awareness of a man whose presence changed the temperature of rooms. Still awake, he said. So are you. I had work, I nearly laughed, and I'm doing embroidery. He moved closer. The silver St. Christopher lighter clicked once in his hand, then shut again without flame. Restraint, exactly where another man might have chosen a cigarette. What are you expecting to find? He asked. Something Sophia didn't trust herself to carry, and you assume she hid it in a child's toy. I assume mothers with enemies don't use obvious places. His silence told me I was right. I worked the seam open another fraction. The wood gave with a soft, reluctant snap. Inside the hollow base sat a folded square of oilskin, thin as a confession. Dante reached it first. Our hands touched over the opening, not accidentally, not fully, just enough for my pulse to turn treacherous and for his gaze to drop to my mouth as if he disliked himself for noticing it. Then he unfolded the oilskin. Inside was a saint card of Saint Agnes, water-stained at one edge, and a strip torn from ledger paper with 3 lines written in Sophia's hand. Pier 14 Bell account 7C St. Agnes Tuesday. My throat closed. Dante looked at the paper, then at me. You know what that means? I hated how still my voice was. I know, St. Agnes is closed on Tuesdays. His eyes narrowed. Meaning if Sophia wrote it that way, the church itself wasn't the destination. I took the card from him and turned it over. A number had been penciled along the back. It was a signal. For whom? I looked at Lucia sleeping under Rose's blanket, one cheek pink now from warmth. For someone she hoped would understand before she died. Dante's gaze did not leave my face. Did you? No point lying. Not to him, not with evidence in his hand and danger in the walls. Yes, the room went very quiet. You're going to tell me why St. Agnes matters to you, he said. I set the blade down carefully. Not tonight. That wasn't a request, and this isn't a marriage where you get to confuse access with entitlement. Something shifted in him then, anger perhaps, not loud, never loud. The dangerous kind, the kind that chose stillness instead of spectacle. But Lucia stirred on the settee, and in the same breath both of us looked toward her. That was the worst part of her, how quickly she turned other priorities childish. Dante glanced back at the music box. Bell account 7C, he said. Gianni will trace it. And Pier 14, I'll handle that. He started for the door, then stopped. When he turned back, he looked not at me but at the opened box in my hands. She hid it well, he said. Yes. He lifted the lighter once, thumb brushing the engraved saint. She was trying to get the child to you. I should have denied it. I should have pretended the dead woman hadn't chosen me. Instead, I said, no, she was trying to get the child somewhere mercy might still exist. He held my gaze for one long, unreadable second. Then he left, and the click of the lighter echoed down the hall like a promise choosing its shape. Chapter 6. Bianca's door. He showed me the room he had never forgiven himself for. Lucia's fever came back the next night. Not high enough to panic Rosa, but enough to make the child restless and glass-eyed, her small body too warm against the sheets. Rain pressed at the windows. The house settled into storm silence. Men moved more softly when weather matched the mood inside. I sat at Lucia's bedside with a cool cloth and the repaired music box on the table beside me. I had sealed the crack, reset the hinge, and pressed fresh gold leaf over the damaged halo. It still bore its scars. So did most things worth keeping. Around midnight, Lucia woke and whispered for the first time. Not my name, not his. Mama! The word went through me so cleanly it felt like a blade. I stroked the hair damp against her forehead. I know, love. Her lashes trembled. Don't let him burn. I went still. Who? But she had already fallen halfway back into fever sleep, mouth parted, hand seeking the blanket. I sat there long after, every nerve awake. When I opened the bedroom door, Dante was in the hall as if he had been listening without admitting it. How long have you been standing there? I asked. Long enough. That was not an answer. With him, it usually was. She said something, I told him. What? I hesitated. His face altered almost imperceptibly, some old instinct rising before I spoke. She said, don't let him burn. The words landed between us like lit paper. Dante looked away first. That scared me more than if he'd stayed still. He walked without speaking, and after a beat I followed him down the corridor, through the west wing, past rooms kept closed and polished and useless. He stopped at the last door under the staircase landing and opened it with a key from his pocket. Dust and lavender met us first. The room beyond had been preserved with the cruelty of wealth. A girl's room. Pale wallpaper gone dim with years, a narrow bed, shelves of books, a porcelain lamp with a cracked shade, and in the corner a painted trunk with scorch marks along one side. I knew before he said it. Bianca, I whispered. He stood just inside the door, not entering far enough to belong there. My sister. The storm grumbled against the windows. I looked at the trunk. At the scorch marks, at the one ribbon still tied around a bedpost, faded to a color that used to be blue. She died in a fire, I said. Yes. He did not offer more. That too was like him, wound as fact, never confession. I moved deeper into the room because someone had to. Lucia remembers fire. She remembers being threatened with it, he said. Raphael used the same story on me when we were boys. If you disobey, flames are what family becomes. I turned slowly. He threatened a child. He threatened whatever could be used. There it was at last, not grief, not rage, but the stripped bone under both. I looked at Bianca's bed. What happened? For a moment I thought he would leave. Then the lighter appeared in his hand, opening with that small metallic click I had begun to hear before I heard my own thoughts. At 19, he said, I had a chance to take Bianca and go. We had cash, passports, a car waiting. Raphael's father had just ordered the killing of a dock foreman who testified against the family. I wanted revenge before I wanted freedom. His mouth changed slightly, contempt aimed inward. I chose to stay one more night. He stared at the unlit flame in the lighter. They burned the safe house before dawn. Bianca died before I reached the upstairs room. I crossed the last space between us before I'd fully decided to do it. His hand was still open around the lighter. I closed my fingers over it. He went rigid, not pulling away, not accepting. A man so unused to comfort that his first response was defense against it. That wasn't your fault, I said quietly. His laugh held no warmth. That's a sentence kind women say when they want to keep loving dangerous men. I don't love you. The lie landed harder than truth would have. Something in his face flickered, brief, violent, almost human. No, he said. You married me for another reason. I should have stepped back then. Instead, I asked, and if I tell you what that reason was, then I'll know whether there's anything in this house that isn't a bargain. His honesty offended me by how much it cost. I released the lighter. He shut it at once, sound sharp in the little room. Down the hall, thunder rolled again. Lucia needs someone in her room tonight, I said. She keeps waking. I'll have Rosa stay. She calls for her mother in her sleep. His jaw tightened. Then you stay, he said. I stared at him. You ordered me not to leave my room 3 nights ago. I've adjusted the order. And you? His gaze held mine. I'll take the chair. There was something so careful in that answer it nearly undid me. Back in Lucia's room, he did exactly that, sat in the armchair by the window while I lay on top of the coverlet beside the child. Hours passed in stormlight and broken sleep. Once, near dawn, Lucia whimpered and reached blindly into the dark. Dante stood before I did. She caught 2 fingers of his hand and held them to her chest without waking. He remained there, motionless, a man pinned in place by a child who did not know what she had done. I watched him in the gray edge of morning. Not boss, not weapon, not husband. Just a man too afraid to move, because Mercy had found him, and he did not yet know whether he deserved it. Chapter 7. The leak. Mercy looked too much like treason in this house. Tommaso was the one who found the second bug. He came into the South Wing war room at noon with a small black listening device in his palm and blood dried along one knuckle. The men at the table went quiet in stages. Dante did not look up from the city map immediately. When he did, the room tightened around it. Where? Dante asked. Under the chapel vestry rail. A chill moved through me. Gianni, seated at the far end with columns of figures and a plate of untouched biscotti, swore under his breath. That's not a leak. That's blasphemy with wiring. Raphael gave a low whistle. Inside the estate, then, we've grown intimate. Tommaso stood very still. Too intimate. Dante's gaze shifted from the device to the men in the room, weighing shoulders, silence, heartbeats. He did not raise his voice. Everyone out except Gianni, Adriana, and Tommaso. Raphael smiled faintly. You wound me, cousin. Live with it. The door closed. Gianni stopped pretending to arrange papers. I remained at the table because Dante had stopped trying to keep me from this part of his world, and because I no longer intended to be sent away from dangers that already knew my name. Tommaso put the bug on the polished wood. Another route was compromised this morning, Dante said. The dummy one. Gianni glanced up sharply. So you seeded it. I did. Tommaso did not move. I understood a second before Gianni did. The false route had only been given to 3 people. Silence flooded the room. When Dante stepped around the table, the lighter in his hand did not open. That frightened me more. An open flame meant judgment. A closed one meant he had already reached it. You've served my family 12 years, Dante said. Yes, you carried Bianca from the front stair when the fire was already in the curtains. Tommaso's throat worked once. Yes, and this is how you repay loyalty. Still, he didn't deny it. Gianni exhaled like a man watching his own tax records burn. Tommaso. Enough, Dante said. Tommaso finally lifted his head. The fracture in him showed at last, not guilt exactly, but the exhausted ruin of someone who had chosen wrong too long. My sister, he said. Dante's face changed by less than a blink. Where? Clinic on Cicero. Raphael's people hold the debt. She tried to leave her husband. He broke her jaw, then sold the debt to Mancini for protection. Tommaso swallowed. They said they'd move her if I didn't report house rotations, gate schedules, nothing that would touch you directly. Nothing. Dante's voice went colder. Sophia is dead. Tommaso shut his eyes once. I didn't know he'd found her. You knew enough. Yes, I thought. Yes. But I also saw the shape of it, how guilt could be made into a leash. How family became ransom in men like Raphael's hands. Dante drew his gun with no wasted movement at all. Gianni stood so abruptly his chair scraped. Ah, bad, this is bad. Dante, I said. He didn't look at me. Tommaso did not reach for a weapon. He only squared his shoulders like a man who had spent the drive to work accepting his own death. She's all I have, he said. And Sophia's child was what she had, Dante replied. The gun remained steady. I moved before caution had time to become wisdom. I stepped between them. Gianni made a sound like a prayer gone bureaucratic. Tommaso went white. Dante's expression did something I could not name because fury and disbelief had arrived together. Move, Adriana. No, now, if you kill him before he gets her out. Raphael wins twice. He already did, and you're about to help him do it again. The room became so still I could hear the tick of the wall clock near the map cabinet. Dante's gaze dropped once to where I stood between the gun and the man it was meant for, then rose back to my face. There was murder in him still. And beneath it, something worse, the terrible possibility that I was right. Tommaso spoke behind me, voice rough. "Don't do this for me." I ignored him. "Ask him where the clinic is, send men. Chain him in the cellar after, if you like. Break every bone he earned. But don't make another sister die because a man you hate knows how to use love as leverage." That hit. I saw it land. Bianca lived in the tendon of his jaw, in the sudden stillness of his hand. At last, Dante lowered the gun. Not much. Enough. "Address," he said. Tommaso gave it immediately. Dante looked at Gianni. "Call 3 cars. No family channels." Gianni already had his phone out. "Done. Also, for the record, I hate when compassion is efficient. It makes it harder to argue against." Tommaso let out a breath that sounded broken. Dante turned to him then, colder than before. "If she's not there, I come back and finish this. She'll be there. I know." Dante's eyes sharpened. "That's how I know you told the truth too late." An hour later, Elena Greco was pulled half-conscious from a private recovery clinic fronting as a dental office on Cicero. 2 guards were dead. 1 fled. Tommaso returned with blood on his shirt that wasn't all his own. He came to Lucia's door after sunset, not entering. "She's safe," he told me. I nodded. "Then so are you." "For tonight," his mouth twisted. "You shouldn't promise what isn't yours." "No," I said. "But sometimes men listen when mercy wears a dress." From behind me came the unmistakable metallic click of the lighter. Tommaso straightened. Dante stood at the end of the corridor in shadow, flame rising, then dying as quickly as it came. "For tonight," he said. "He breathes." Tommaso bowed his head once and walked away. I stayed where I was. "You undermined me," Dante said when we were alone. "I stopped you from doing what Raphael wanted. He wanted me weak. No, he wanted you ruined." The words hung there. His gaze moved over me, slow and unreadable. "And you think there's a difference?" "I know there is." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he came closer, stopped 1 arm's length away, and lifted his hand as if to touch my face. He did not. His fingers closed instead around empty air. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you again why you married me." I held his gaze. "When this is over, I might answer." Chapter 8, Sent. "Agnes, I told my husband the truth in the place that made me worth saving. We left for St. Agnes at dawn under armed escort and weather the color of old tin. Dante did not want me to go. That was obvious from the way he said nothing for the first 20 minutes of the drive. Men like him became quieter the closer they came to what mattered. Lucia sat between us in the back seat with her repaired music box in her lap, thumb rubbing the fresh gold leaf halo as if it were a prayer she could touch. No one had wanted to bring her. No one had managed to stop her. When the orphanage gates came into view, my chest hurt with a homesickness I had taught myself to live around. St. Agnes was brick and modesty and small windows that held winter light badly. 23 children lived there on luck, church money, and stubborn female labor. I had known every cracked tile in its hallways before I ever knew the layout of the Salvetter mansion. Rosa met us at the front steps, having arrived earlier with supplies and outrage. "You took too long," she told Dante. He inclined his head slightly. "Good morning to you too. Don't charm me." I'm old enough to remember when boys who brooded still carried crates. Gianni, climbing out of the second car with a satchel of files, muttered, "I'd carry crates for her, or low-sodium biscotti." Or a mortgage. Rosa ignored him with the precision of long practice. Inside, the children gathered in doorways, trying and failing not to stare at the armed men. Lucia went still beside me. I touched the back of her head. "It's all right," I whispered. She looked up. "Here." The single word nearly brought me to my knees. "Yes," I said. "Here." Mother Superior Cecilia received us in her office with the kind of face God gives women who no longer need men's permission to be feared. Her eyes went to Dante first, then to the bodyguards, then to Lucia. "You brought the storm into my building," she said. Dante replied, "I brought protection." Same breed. Different tailoring. Gianni made a strangled sound that might have been devotion. Once the doors were shut, Dante laid Sophia's oilskin note on the desk. Mother Cecilia's expression hardened. "You've seen this before," I said. She looked at me for a long time. "Not the note, the pattern." Dante stayed very still. "Explain," so I did. Because there was no point keeping it once we were standing in the center of the thing. 3 years ago, I said, St. Agnes lost a major endowment. Money vanished from a diocesan family trust, then reappeared in shell charities tied to riverfront import companies. I looked at Dante. "Bell accounts." His eyes did not leave my face. "Children here started being approached," Mother Cecilia said flatly. "Not taken, assessed. Girls asked questions about adoption. Boys asked about work. Men donating food who had no interest in food." Rage moved through Dante like weather behind stone. "I traced one of the donors to a Mancini holding company," I said, quietly. I had no proof I could survive with, only enough to know St. Agnes would be sold within the year if no one with enough power stepped in. "And so," Dante said, voice low, "you married one." There it was, not accusation, worse, recognition. I met his gaze. "Yes." Lucia looked between us, sensing a kind of danger she could not yet name. Mother Cecilia folded her hands. "She came to me after the proposal." Dante's head turned slightly. "You knew. She asked whether marrying a man she did not love to protect children she did would damn her soul." The silence that followed had edges. "What did you tell her?" Dante asked. Mother Cecilia did not blink. "That women have been mistaking sacrifice for sin since Eden." Gianni put a hand over his face. "I'm going to need that embroidered on something." Dante ignored him. His gaze remained on me so intently, it felt like being held still. "Why not tell me?" "Because men with power dislike learning they were chosen for function. And wives dislike learning their husbands have daughters hidden in other houses." That one landed clean. We stood there with our ugliest truths between us, while a child traced circles on a music box, and a nun judged both of us insufficiently evolved. At last, Mother Cecilia slid a ledger across the desk. "We found this in parish storage after Sophia came here in March." I opened it. Dock invoices, food deliveries, maintenance receipts. On 2 pages, shipment codes matched the Bell account number from Sophia's note. Pier 14 appeared 3 times. One entry listed temporary intake beside a Tuesday date. Children. God. Dante read over my shoulder. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Raphael's using the orphanage roots as cover," I said. "Not to move children out of here yet. To test what nobody watches." Deliveries, record gaps. He wanted the channels clean before he made them profitable. Lucia had gone very quiet. Dante noticed first. Always the danger in him, now, finally, the care following. He crouched in front of her, eye level, an impossible sight in a nun's office. "You're safe here," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Will it burn?" His face emptied for one shattered second before discipline returned. "No," he said, "not while I'm breathing." She considered that, then placed the music box in his hands. Trust by transfer. Again. He rose slowly, box in one hand, the other braced at her back for the smallest moment. Not ownership, not authority, support. Mother Cecilia saw it, so did I. When we stepped into the corridor, he caught my elbow and drew me into the alcove outside the office, out of sight of the children. The touch was firm enough to stop me, careful enough not to bruise. "You used me," he said. "Yes, and you saved them. Yes." Something moved in his face, anger burning through into admiration and not enjoying the journey. "I should despise you for that." I swallowed. "I know." Instead he said, very quietly, "Little saint, if you had asked, I would have done it anyway." That was the cruelest thing he had ever given me, because I believed him. Before I could answer, Tommaso appeared at the far end of the hall, bloodless and urgent. "Pier 14, he said. "Tonight." Dante released my arm, and the war came fully into focus. Chapter 9, The Locked Door. The first night my husband stayed. By evening the house had become a weapon. Cars moved in and out under dark instructions. Men checked magazines, radios, routes. Tommaso ran security with a brutality sharpened by shame. Gianni had turned the dining room into an accounting triage center, papers everywhere. Glasses slipping down his nose as he traced Bell account transfers through 6 shell companies and 1 supposedly charitable shipping fund. Rosa fed everyone whether they deserved it or not. When she set a bowl of pasta beside Gianni, he looked up as if personally visited by heaven. "I'm not supposed to have starch," he whispered. Rosa deadpanned, then perished dramatically. "I would if it impressed you. It would annoy me." He ate every bite anyway. I might have smiled if Dante hadn't been standing in the doorway watching me, with the kind of stillness that always meant he had decided something dangerous. "Lucia sleeps in your room tonight," he said. "She has every night. You sleep too." That, more than anything, revealed his worry. He only became more controlling when fear began to look like logistics. "And you?" I asked. His gaze flicked toward the corridor where armed men moved under muted lights. "I'll be in and out." He started to leave. "Dante," he turned. I hated how much effort it took to say the next thing. "If Pier 14 is a trap, don't go where revenge makes you stupid." His expression altered by a degree so small another woman might have missed it. "You think that's still my weakness? I think it's the wound that taught all your others how to speak." For a beat, I thought he would answer with anger. Instead, he came into the room, closed the door, and stood there with us. Me beside the fire, Lucia asleep already in the center of my bed under a mountain of blankets. The repaired music box on the nightstand. A domestic scene forced to share oxygen with violence. "I was 19, he said. "No one had yet told me there are losses you can survive only by becoming someone else." I said nothing. He touched the bedpost once, absently, eyes on Lucia. "After Bianca died, I locked every bedroom door in the house for a year. I thought if I controlled entrances, I controlled endings." "And did you?" His mouth bent without humor. "No." A silence opened, not empty, full. I crossed it before I could talk myself out of it. He looked down as I stopped in front of him. Close enough now to smell cedar, smoke, and the clean metal scent that always seemed to follow his guns and his lighter. Close enough to know he was holding himself still on purpose. "I didn't tell you about St. Agnes because I didn't know what you were," I said. "That's honest. I'm trying something new. And what am I now?" My throat tightened. "A man I was wrong about in some ways and dangerously right about in others." He let out one low breath. "That's the kindest judgment I've had in years." His hand rose slowly, giving me time to move if I wanted. When I didn't, his knuckles brushed one loose strand of hair back from my cheek. Such a small touch, my body answered it like betrayal. "You should sleep," he said, voice rougher than before. "That sounds like refusal. It's discipline." I looked up at him. "You've had 9 months of that." "Yes. And tonight." His eyes dropped to my mouth again, then closed once, briefly, as if the sight offended his self-command. "Tonight," he said, "I know exactly how little discipline I have left." The honesty of it undid something in me. I kissed him first, not gently, not wisely. With all the anger, humiliation, fear, and wanting I had spent 9 months dressing in silk and silence. For half a heartbeat, he did not move. Then discipline died. His hands framed my face, then my waist, then my back as if he had been learning the shape of restraint only so he would know precisely what he was breaking. He kissed me like a man starving with excellent manners, deep, controlled until control became impossible, then deeper still. I felt the shudder in him when I clutched his shirt. The lighter clicked somewhere as it slipped from his hand onto the bedside table. Metal, saint, choice. He pulled away first, breathing hard, forehead against mine. "Not like this," he said. My pulse was wild. "Because I'm angry. Because if I touch you more tonight, I won't leave this room when I should." That was somehow worse. I laughed once, shaky and not amused. "Your restraint is becoming insulting." His thumb brushed my lower lip. "Little saint, you have no idea how close I am to insulting both of us." Lucia shifted in sleep behind me. We both went still at once, and then, absurdly, quietly, we laughed. It lasted only a second, but it was the first thing in our marriage that felt unarranged. He rested his forehead to mine again. "When this ends," he said, "there will be no more separate bedrooms." The promise hit somewhere low and dangerous. Before I could answer, someone pounded once on the outer door. Tommaso's voice came through. "It's time!" Dante stepped back. The distance felt indecent. He picked up the lighter, snapped it shut, and slid it into his pocket. At the door, he looked back once. At me flushed and furious, at Lucia asleep in borrowed peace, at the room beginning to resemble a life. "If the alarms sound," he said, "lock the inner door and wait for me." I crossed my arms. That sounded almost like concern. It was an order. Liar. For the first time in all the months I had known him, Dante smiled without cruelty at all. Then he left for the docks. And I stood there with my mouth, still bruised by my husband, and the terrible knowledge that fear had become love, while neither of us was looking straight at it. Chapter 10, Pier 14. He chose rescue before revenge. The alarms sounded at 1:13 a.m., not at the docks. At home. By then I knew enough to understand what it meant. Pier 14 had always been bait. Raphael wanted Dante's forces divided. His instincts dragged toward riverfront rage, while the real strike came for what would ruin him most completely. The child. Lucia came upright in bed before the second tone, eyes wide and instantly aware. I was already out from under the covers. "Shoes," I told her. "Now," she obeyed with terrifying speed. Outside, the corridor filled with movement. Men shouting, boots on marble, the crackle of radios. I locked the outer door, then the inner dressing room door exactly as Dante had ordered. For 3 breaths we had safety. On the 4th, gunfire erupted downstairs. Lucia flinched but did not cry. I grabbed the music box, because I had learned by then that frightened children deserve at least one irrational thing. "Come here," I whispered. She pressed against me. The lighter's metallic echo lived in my head, though Dante was miles away. Then the window glass shattered. A body came through in a spray of rain and diamonds. I dragged Lucia behind the bed as a masked man rolled to his feet, bleeding from the shoulder and still carrying a knife. He saw us, smiled once with too many teeth, and came fast. The shot that dropped him came from the dressing room door. Tommaso. He kicked the body aside and crossed the room in 3 strides. "They breached the west wing," he said. "We move now." I didn't waste time asking how he'd gotten past the locked inner door. He had his own keys to every survival in this house. "Where?" Priest stare. "Basement route." Lucia clung to my robe. Tommaso scooped her up without asking and led us into the hidden service passage behind the wardrobe wall. Stone, damp. Old Catholic architecture designed by men who expected sin and siege in equal measure. Up above, the house roared. Halfway down the narrow stair, another burst of gunfire cracked through the masonry. Tommaso shoved me flat against the wall and covered Lucia with his body. Dust rained from the ceiling. "Go," he said. "If I stop, keep going." I looked at the blood already soaking through his side. "No, that wasn't, I know." We moved together. In the basement corridor near the wine vaults, we found Rosa holding a shotgun with terrifying competence and Gianni clutching a ledger case like an infant. "Rosa!" I breathed. She narrowed her eyes. "What did you think I was going to do, knit through an invasion?" Gianni added. "For the record, I hate all cardio, including survival." Lucia, somehow, made a frightened little huff that might have been the ghost of a laugh. Then footsteps thundered from the far end. Not ours. Raphael appeared in the archway beyond the casks, elegant even now, one hand bloody, the wolf head ring bright and obscene. 2 men flanked him. "There you are," he said softly. "The family." Tommaso raised his gun. Raphael smiled at him first. And the loyal dog finally off the leash. "You used my sister," Tommaso said. "I used your devotion. Don't cheapen it by calling it love." The first shot came from Rosa. It took one guard in the throat. The cellar exploded into noise. Gianni screamed something heroic and entirely administrative. Tommaso shoved me behind a stone pillar with Lucia. Bullets chewed splinters from old casks. Wine burst into the air like blood too expensive to waste. Raphael moved with horrifying calm, not toward Tommaso but toward us. Of course, always the child, always the witness. Always the softest place in a man's body. He caught Lucia's coat sleeve before I could drag her fully back. I hit him with the music box. It cracked against his wrist. Gold leaf flashed. He swore. Then another gunshot tore through the cellar and Raphael staggered. Dante. He came through the smoke at the far arch like every whispered thing men meant when they said his name. Coat gone. Shirt dark with rain and someone else's blood. Gun up. Lighter bright eyes fixed on his cousin with a hatred so pure it felt old enough to inherit. Raphael laughed, actually laughed, even wounded. I knew you'd come back here first. Dante did not answer. That mattered, because Bianca had died while he chose revenge. Because this time he had chosen the house, us, before the dock. Before the trap, before the man who wanted him ruined. I understood it the instant Raphael did. The smile slipped. Dante reached us in 3 strides and put himself between his cousin and Lucia. One hand went back without looking, finding the child's shoulder, then my arm, confirming both of us by touch alone. Are you hurt? No, I said. Lucia whispered, He broke it. Dante glanced down at the shattered music box in my hand. Something in his face went still in a new and dangerous way. Raphael saw it and smiled again, bloody now. There, that's the man I wanted. But Dante did not lunge, did not take the bait. He only said, Take them out. Tommaso and Rosa moved at once. Gianni, astonishingly, grabbed a dropped pistol and waved it in what I can only describe as a fiscally responsible threat. I got Lucia 3 steps toward the passage before Raphael shouted after us. Ask him why Sophia kept the girl hidden. Ask your husband what kind of man makes motherhood look safer at a distance. That one struck where it meant to. I turned. Dante's expression did not. But his lighter clicked open in his hand, flames small and silver-white in the blood-dark cellar. Choice, restraint, home not yet one. Out, he said to me, eyes never leaving his cousin, so I went. Because for the first time, I believed he would come back from the fire. Chapter 11. The fire he chose. The child called him father in a room full of smoke. The cellar fight ended above ground in the east courtyard. Because men like Raphael never died where they were cornered. They ran toward spectacle, toward witnesses, toward flame if they could arrange it. By the time I reached the chapel steps with Lucia in my arms and Tommaso bleeding beside us, smoke was rising from the garage wing. Somewhere beyond the hedge wall, sirens began to gather. Dante and Raphael emerged from the side garden seconds later, circling each other across wet stone and fallen leaves, both armed, both marked by blood. Raphael moved with the ugly looseness of a wounded man too hateful to collapse. Dante moved like decision made flesh. The courtyard lights threw gold over the wolf head ring. Raphael saw me on the chapel steps and laughed once. Good, let her see what family makes of men. Lucia buried her face in my neck. Then against my shoulder whispered a word so soft I almost missed it. Papa! Everything in me stopped. Dante heard it. He did not look at us. Couldn't. But the sound went through him visibly, like a blade made of mercy. Raphael heard it too, and that was the real cruelty, that he understood the value of tenderness precisely because he could not keep any. There, he said, that's what ruins you, not bullets. Not cops want. He fired first. Dante moved left. The shot hit stone. Tommaso raised his gun from one knee and took Raphael in the thigh. Rosa, still carrying the shotgun like righteous domesticity, barked at Gianni to get Lucia inside. Gianni, pale and heroic by accident, hustled 2 altar boys and Mother Cecilia, who had apparently arrived during the chaos and looked wholly unimpressed by gunfire, through the chapel doors. Raphael kept his feet through fury alone. I tried to teach you, he shouted at Dante. Love is what burns first. Dante's voice came low, deadly clear. No, cowards do, Raphael charged. It happened quickly after that and somehow in pieces. Dante knocking the gun aside, both men slamming into the rain-dark fountain wall, the brutal economy of close violence, the ring flashing once. Twice, Tommaso limping forward despite blood loss, my own voice breaking somewhere I did not hear. Then Raphael pulled a hidden blade, not at Dante, at Lucia. He moved like a serpent, even dying, all last instinct and spite. Dante saw it a fraction before I did, and chose, not the kill, the rescue. He let his cousin go, turned, and took the knife through his own side as he threw himself between blade and child. The world became noise. Rosa fired. Raphael went down hard against the chapel rail, chest shattered, wolf head ring scraping stone on the way. He stayed down. Dante dropped to one knee. Lucia was screaming now, full voice at last, the sound of terror forced back into life. I ran to him, to both of them, my hands already on the blood pouring between his fingers. No, I said, though the wound had already happened. No, he looked at Lucia first. Of course he did. You all right? He asked her, voice gone rough around the edges. She sobbed once and threw herself against him carefully, tiny hands catching at his jacket. Papa! This time there was nothing soft about the damage it did to him. It split him open more surely than the knife. He touched the back of her head with a hand that shook exactly once. I've got you, he said. The words were mine from the night she arrived. Now his too. Tommaso reached us, white-faced. Medic's coming! Dante's gaze found mine over Lucia's hair. There are moments when love becomes less a feeling than an instruction from the body. Mine arrived then, complete and terrifying. Stay with me, I said. A crooked almost smile touched his mouth. That sounded like an order. Yes, good. He coughed once, pain cutting through discipline at last. I pressed harder against the wound. Blood soaked my hands, hot and slick and unbearable. You are not dying on church steps, I told him. Embarrassing place for it. Dante, his eyes sharpened at my tone, then softened impossibly when they moved to Lucia clinging to him. I should have found her, he said quietly. I knew he meant 5 years ago. The hidden flat, Sophia's fear, the cost of being a man women thought safer from a distance. Yes, I said. Honesty for honesty, you should have. He nodded once, accepting the wound. And now, he asked. I leaned close enough that only he could hear me. Now you stay alive long enough to be better than before. The medic team arrived in a flood of hands and orders. They lifted Lucia from him gently. She fought until I promised I'd stay beside him. Gianni appeared at my shoulder, hair ruined, glasses crooked, whispering like a man in church and crisis at once. Good news, he said shakily. I secured the Bell account ledgers. Bad news, I may never emotionally recover from bravery. Rosa, reloading shells with terrifying calm, said, You'll recover when I make soup. He looked at her as if she'd proposed marriage. Dante, even bleeding, noticed. If I live through this, he muttered, I'm giving you both a hallway and calling it dowry. I made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Then they were carrying him toward the ambulance lights. His hand found mine once before they loaded him in. The St. Christopher lighter was pressed into my palm, warm from his body, slick with rain and blood. He closed my fingers around it. Keep it, he said. I climbed in beside him and did not let go. Chapter 12. St. Christopher, the click meant home. Dante lived. The surgeon told me so at 4:17 in the morning, while I stood outside intensive care with dried blood on my dress, and Lucia asleep against my shoulder in a hospital blanket. I thanked him without elegance. Then I sat down in the corridor and cried with my face turned into the child's hair because I had run out of dignified ways to survive that week. By noon, Raphael Mancini was dead. 3 Bell account shells were frozen. 2 captains had switched loyalty before the body cooled. And Gianni had somehow turned emergency bookkeeping into an act of seduction. I brought Rosa coffee, he informed me solemnly in the waiting room. Black, no sugar, and she drank it. How devastatingly intimate. He straightened his tie. We are progressing. Tommaso survived too. He refused morphine until Alina was moved to a safe apartment under Salvator protection, and Mother Cecilia personally informed him that guilt was not a personality. After that, he slept 18 hours and woke looking 10 years older and strangely more honest. Lucia stayed at my side almost constantly. She spoke in fragments now, small words, careful ones. Enough to ask where Dante was. Enough to tell Rosa the hospital soup was bad. Enough to inform Gianni, with grave authority, that music boxes should not be used as weapons unless necessary. It was necessary, he told her. She considered. Then okay. When Dante finally woke, I was alone with him. Afternoon light lay pale across the private room. Machines breathed and counted. He looked wrong in a hospital bed. Too still, too mortal, robbed of the architecture of command. Yet the moment his eyes found me, something of the old force returned, quiet and absolute. You stayed, he said. The understatement offended me instantly enough to make my eyes burn. I stabbed 3 nurses and bribed 2 priests for the privilege. His mouth shifted. That sounds expensive. I'll send you the invoice. He studied me for a moment longer, then noticed what was in my hand. His lighter. I had carried it since the ambulance, not for danger anymore. For proof, he held out his hand. I gave it to him. The silver saint lay against his palm, scratched near the hinge, a little blood still dark in the engraving despite hospital's sterilized light. He turned at once, then looked back at me. Open it, he said. I did. The familiar metallic click rang through the room. For months that sound had meant men straightening, doors locking, fear arriving before truth. At the docks it had meant restraint. In the cellar, choice. At the chapel, the life between us held by a thread. Here, in clean light and after almost losing him, it meant something else entirely. He watched my face as I understood. Home, I whispered. His gaze changed. Yes. No threat in it, no judgment. Only the dangerous tenderness of a man who had bled enough to stop lying about what mattered. I set the lighter on the tray table before I dropped it from shaking fingers. You nearly died. I noticed. I moved before reason could arrange pried into anything useful and kissed him with all the delayed terror of the last 12 hours. He winced once when I leaned too close to his side, then caught my face in both hands anyway and kissed me back like a man who had been offered resurrection in small human form. When I drew back, I was crying again, irritatingly. He brushed the tears away with his thumb. Little saint, he said softly, and for the first time the name held no accusation at all. I'm sorry, for Sophia, for 5 years too late. His throat worked once. For 9 months of making you pay for wounds you didn't inflict. For thinking distance was protection. I sat beside him carefully. It was, I know, and I'm sorry I married you like a strategy. His mouth bent. You saved 23 children. I also manipulated a mafia boss. That part, he said, I find oddly flattering. I laughed despite myself. Then the door opened and Lucia slipped in ahead of Rosa, solemn in borrowed socks, braid crooked from sleep. She saw him awake and froze. Dante went very still too, as if sudden movement might frighten the moment back into hiding. Lucia climbed carefully onto the chair by the bed. In her hands she carried the music box, repaired again by my own exhausted fingers in the waiting room at dawn, crack sealed, halo regilded, hinge reset. It's fixed, she announced. Dante looked at the box, then at her. Good, she held it out. For you! Something broke open in the room so quietly no machine could have measured it. He took the box as if it were holy. Thank you, he said. Lucia nodded, satisfied. Then, after a courage-building breath, leaned forward and touched his uninjured arm. Papa! His eyes closed, just once. When they opened again, every old locked door in him seemed to stand differently on its hinges. Lucia, he said, voice low and unsteady in a way I would remember all my life. Rosa turned discreetly toward the window. Gianni, lurking behind her with flowers he was probably pretending were for everyone, began to cry in a highly administrative fashion. I'm not emotional, he whispered to no one. This is stress hydration. 3 weeks later, Dante came home, not to the old arrangement, not to separate bedrooms and polite war. Lucia's room was moved between hours, then hours became one. Tommaso returned to work slower and quieter, no longer pretending loyalty had never cost him blood. Elena took a job with Mother Cecilia and terrified several men who underestimated women with broken histories. Gianni began eating pasta openly. Rosa allowed him to carry grocery bags, and once, in the kitchen, kissed his cheek so swiftly he forgot numbers for a full minute. At dusk on the first evening the house was truly ours again. Lucia sat on the rug in the morning room drawing saints with terrible proportions, while I mended the hem of her coat. Dante stood by the window, no gun in sight, jacket off, the city dim beyond the glass. He clicked the St. Christopher lighter open once. Metal, memory, choice, then shut it. No one tensed. No one went quiet in fear. Lucia looked up. Again! He smiled, that rare, ruinous smile that belonged only to us now, and clicked it once more. I watched him across the lamplight and thought of midnight blood on brass, of a dying woman in silk and rain, of a child handed into my arms before any wife's pride had time to speak. I thought of all the ways love had entered this house disguised as scandal, burden, leverage, grief, and stayed anyway. Dante crossed the room and bent to kiss the top of Lucia's head. Then he looked at me. Come here, little saint. This time I went gladly. And when he kissed me, the lighter sat closed on the table beside us, silver saint catching the lamplight like a blessing that had finally learned our names.